Hey team, welcome back to another incredible episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I am joined by Mr. Todd Churchill, who is a social entrepreneur and consulting CFO who has supported, look at this, more than 130 businesses and nonprofits since 1997. I'm going to stop there with the introduction because that tells you that we've got a wealth of information coming at us today. We've got a short amount of time to record, and I want to get Todd right into it. So, Todd, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. It's an honor.
I'm very excited. We just spent a half an hour talking, and I had to stop the conversation to make sure we had time to record something. And this is going to be fascinating. So, folks, buckle your seatbelts, turn up your speakers, get ready for some intentional leadership conversation. Todd, you get the same opening question that everybody does. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
Such a great question. Intentionality means understanding why we do things. And you can always find another layer underneath our current understanding of why. Why does this happen? Why has this been the way this has been done throughout history? To me, you can't have intentionality unless you can understand the history of just humanity. Why do we do what we do? Why do we feed ourselves the way we do? Why do we raise crops the way we do? At some point, somebody discovered something that worked and created incentives around it to keep it going. And the more we understand that, the more we can understand why we do what we do.
I really love that answer. That's one of the more unique answers that we've been given on this show. Understanding why we do things. It's so good. It's so good. I love the way your brain works. Before we get into the rest of it, where did the evolution of your mindset come from and the way that you think about things? Because there's a very intentional and thoughtful way that you proceed through your thought process. So you spend a lot of time thinking, reading, going to conferences.
I do. I spend a lot of time thinking and reading. I would probably attribute it to my paternal grandfather, who was a philosopher attorney. And in the 1930s, he had a small stock portfolio in 1928 that he sold. And he had cash in the early 90s and didn't have any work to do. He owned a law practice, but there really wasn't, the economy was terrible and there wasn't any work. So he and his wife traveled very inexpensively around the world, literally from Moline, Illinois, all the way to, they sailed in the Queen Mary to England, and then went by land from France all the way to Shanghai, and then back by boat to Seattle, and then back to Moline, Illinois. And that just changed his life. He became passionate about human history and understanding that civilizations America, we're just so young. Mm-hmm. We don't have any context for why have things stood the test of time over hundreds or thousands of years. And that just broadened his mind. And somehow I spent a lot of time with him as a kid, and some of that transferred to me, apparently. So I'm fascinated by understanding history so that I can understand today and understand myself.
That's really fascinating and a really cool story. I have a desire to sail around the world, and to hear that is very cool. And I mean, you're thinking about 100 years. 100 years ago, America was still only about 150 years old, right?
Right.
And I've done a little bit of genealogy research. I've been able to go back 10 joules deep. And I can get back until about the mid 1600s. They were a part of the Reformed Church in England. And so there's records of birth and marriages and things like this. And they've all been in America basically since the late 1600s. So it's early 1700s. So pre-United States, of course. And I was talking to my kids about this on the way to school this morning. A 250-year anniversary, big thing. We're talking about some of the stuff in the news. And my daughter's like, that's just really not that old. I was like, what a wise statement from a 16-year-old.
That's right.
So I said, you're right. It's only six or seven generation of our family goes back to the very beginning, to the Revolutionary War. So interesting stuff. Really cool share from that. Todd, give us the background. So you've been in a lot of different things, from fractional CFO work to, a law degree, to the cattle industry, growing up, in Moline, Illinois. There's so many things here. So if you could use that beautiful brain of yours and start putting it together so we can get to know you, that would be great.
Sure. So I grew up on a farm just outside of Moline, Illinois, and I grew up on that farm because my dad fell in love with horses and cattle when he was a child. And the only reason that happened is that this grandfather that I spoke about in the 1950s, the war was going poorly. And if England surrendered to Germany, Germany would own Canada. And his house was just a mile or two from the largest Army arsenal base in the United States, which sits on an island in the Mississippi River called the Rock Island Arsenal. And that would be a target. So he went and bought 80 acres of farmland 11 miles outside of town, had zero interest in farming, never went there hardly. And the war was over, and we always had a tenant farmer. But when my dad was 7 or 8 years old, he started spending his summers out there living with the tenant farmer. And a neighbor, there's an old cowboy who was a neighbor who bought my dad a pony, a saddle, and got him a job at the sale barn. And my dad has been entranced with all things horses and Western and cattle ever since.
Wow.
So when he was 16, his dad, my grandfather, said, the farm's always, it loses money every year. It was obviously a dumb thing when I went to buy it. It was, that turned out not to be a problem. I think we should sell it. And my dad said, can I run it for a year and see if I can make money with it? And he did. It did. And that is now 1,800 acres instead of 80 acres that's we've had the good fortune to farm and operate in the
Amazing.
family. So I grew up with horses and cattle, and I grew up around farming. We didn't run the farm on a day-to-day basis. We've always had a great farm managers that have done that for us. My dad has a law practice and focused primarily on estate planning for other farmers. And so I just grew up in this entrepreneurial family where we were always talking about business and investments and how do you succeed in ag, and how I was taught to see ag as a part of a diversified portfolio. So ag in general owning ag land is the best way to retain wealth. Throughout all of human history, only gold, silver, and land hold up to the inevitable changes in currency valuations, uh, booms and busts cycles, inflationary times, fiat currencies. Land, gold, and silver are the only things that are tried and true. And gold and silver I mean, if you're mobile, you want gold and silver. So certain cultures that needed to be mobile for certain reasons have developed an affinity for those. Others have developed an affinity for land as that. And it's just something that's hardwired into us. Most people instinctively know that they want to control some land somehow. That just feels like something that's imperative to us on a molecular level that we don't really even understand. Unfortunately, because everybody wants to own land, land is always valued at something far greater than its cash flow potential. So you can't pay for land with the cash flow that it creates, except for very, very few circumstances. So you have to figure out how to do something else for a living that produces enough cash flow in excess of what you're living on that you can invest the excess in purchasing land. And because land is a stable asset, it's relatively easy to get financing for. So, which is also one of the reasons that land values grow far faster than its cash flow ability. So all of this was kind of baked into me as a kid, that
Yeah.
land isn't how you make your living. Farming isn't necessarily how you make your living. Land is how you preserve wealth and pass it on multi-generation.
Mm. I think there's some really good lessons in that as we think about how do you prepare the next generation to think about these things. I will tell you straight up that I was not brought up to think about these things this way. And even though we sort of did that, we had a little bit of land, nothing, too extravagant or nothing too much, but it was a survival mechanism. It was something that we lived off of, that we grew food on, and that we, did recreation on, things like that. But so few, like I've had to spend almost the entirety of my 20 some year career now learning, unlearning, and relearning how to think about things, so that and I'm completely in your camp, and I completely agree, but we become very partial to that.
Well, yeah, right.
Right.
Right. You can't be unemotional about land. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
an
And I remember
emotional connection. It's an emotional investment.
Yeah, we had a little 13-acre thing that I grew up on. That was where we lived, and that was the moment I had the first right of refusal to buy it. My siblings didn't want to or couldn't, and it was in Minnesota and 1,000 miles away from where I'm living now, 1,500 miles away, and it was. I'm sure we could have done something with it, but it just wasn't a good enough. I had to look at it as an investment as opposed to the dirt that I grew up on, and
Hmm.
we walked away from it. And I wasn't necessarily popular with a couple of my siblings for a minute, but ultimately everybody got it because it would have been, it would have been harsh. And now there's a family with 4 kids and they're
Yeah,
homeschooling and they're having their own experience with it, and it's better. It's probably
right.
better cared for than I would have been able to. But I love the intentionality of where you're coming at or coming from, as you answer these things. And so I want to make sure that we have some opportunity to get to the Pergena story. So,
Yes.
because so you guys, Todd is the CFO of Pergena Systems. If you go back probably about 8 or 10 episodes at this point, you'll see another interview with Steve Polsky, who's the CEO of Pergena Systems, and has pulled this or helped pull this group together. It's a very interesting story. So, Todd, first of all, what brought you into the cattle space? Because you have history in cattle
Yeah.
production prior to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so my first experience with cattle was using pasture cattle to train cutting horses on. So that's just fun. I mean, there's
Hmm.
there's few things that are more fun than being around cattle on pasture. Uh, and this gets into the concentration thing that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but pasture cattle are just almost always a great time. I also was a part of our family business was running a 500 head feedlot. So we would grow high moisture corn, feed that to cattle to add value to the corn because corn was worth even less in the 70s and 80s than it is today. On an inflation adjusted basis, it's worth far less now. But back then, we were, like most people, were farmer feeders. We wanted to add value to our corn by feeding it to cattle. And the secondary benefit to that is agronomic. So if you raise corn and you have to spend money to dry it in order to sell it, you're selling 100% of the nutrients that you put into that corn crop off your farm. If you feed that corn to cattle, you're keeping almost all the nutrients on the farm because when you sell live cattle, you're selling 77% water and you get to keep the manure. You get paid for the weight gain, which you ship off the farm, which is roughly half of the nutrient value of the corn. And the other half you get to keep in the form of the manure and apply that back to your soils again. So we stopped doing that because taking care of livestock is a lot of work. It's a 365-day job and there's no break from it. So we've decoupled livestock farming from corn production in the United States just because it's hard work. And if you can have your winters off, why not do that? The downside to that is that you have to buy all of your fertility now because you no longer selling off 100% of the nutrients. So you buy nutrients every year, you grow a corn crop, 100% of those nutrients leave the farm, and now you're a slave to purchasing those inputs again the next year. That's not a closed system. That makes it harder to be successful as a corn farmer. The very best hedge for a corn farmer is having a cattle operation that's integrated with the farming operation so that you can add value to corn. Usually when corn is cheap, cattle are valuable and vice versa. And so it's a great hedge. So that's what I grew up with. Never dealing with cattle in a feedlot wasn't something I wanted to build a career around. So I went to college, went into public accounting, and I've had a practice as a fractional CFO since 1997, since leaving public accounting, where I've worked with hundreds of different food and ag companies. One of those clients was a startup meat processor in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. I learned the niche meat business there, was a part of building out one of the few plants that was custom designed to serve the needs of the niche beef and pork and bison market. We built that to serve the people that were doing grass fed and organic and bison and pastured pigs. And that, because I had access to that processing capacity, I ended up starting what became the first national grass fed beef brand in the United States called Thousand Hills Cattle Company. I started
Hmm.
that in 2003 because I had a conversation with a good friend of mine who was one of the first integrative physicians in the United States. He had a private practice in Minneapolis that was a cash only concierge practice. So you had your regular doctor that took insurance, that if you broke your leg or if you needed to get antibiotics, you went to him. and then Dr. Chris Foley's practice called Minnesota Natural Medicine, he's since passed away, was all the unique new stuff that insurance wouldn't cover. And one of the things that he was particularly passionate about in the early 2000s was grass-fed beef. He was literally prescribing it to every one of his patients, that he wanted them eating grass-fed beef. The research was compelling. He said, I was visiting with him one day, and he said, you grew up with cattle. Help me understand this. I don't know anything about cattle. The research is so compelling. I want my patients eating grass-fed beef, but it's so terrible. It's so tough, and it's gamey. It's worse than venison in many cases. It's freezer burned, and you got to go to some farm and buy a side of beef, and you don't know if it's going to be any good. You get it home and you put it in your freezer, and then you find out it's inedible. So why is this so hard? Why isn't grass-fed beef good to eat? And he said, if you could figure that out, I've got this huge market for you, because I got all these people that want to eat it, but it's terrible. And so I said, well, I grew up with cattle. How hard can it be? You're just not going to feed them any grain, right? And realized it was infinitely harder than that. But I started Thousand Hills Cattle Company on a whim to say, well, I'm just going to go find some cattle that weren't fed grain and weren't given antibiotics and hormones. And I've got a processing plant with capacity. I know I can get them processed and turned into a high quality product. And our first couple of years, it wasn't all that great, but we learned, and I became obsessed with one question every day. What can I learn today to produce the best eating experience possible? Because as a business owner, I didn't want to be in the grass-fed beef business. I wanted to be in the great eating experience beef business. Grass-fed beef was just the hook to get people to buy it the first time. What kept them buying it and what made them loyal customers was creating raising beef in a way and managing the processing in a way that every single steak and roast and burger was the best you'd ever had. And two things were happening. One is that the flavor profile, the tenderness, all that was right. But then subconsciously at a molecular level, our bodies tell us when we ate something that was deeply nourishing and recognizable to our body. And most modern food isn't recognizable to us. We've only been eating it for, if you look at all of human history, for a third of a second, if you think of it that way. Nearly everything we consume today is foreign to our body. And grass-fed beef is just something that our bodies recognize. So I built a business on that.
I want to stand on that for a second, and I agree. I grew up on venison. We were too poor to afford much beef. And so we would just go kill venison whenever we needed it. We had plenty of it walking around. And so I grew up on that, and which is, I don't know if there's a cleaner meat that you can eat.
No, right. I agree.
I had now in my 40s, I've developed, just probably has been there under the surface for a long time, but just a lot of just general food issues. And so I'm incredibly conscious about what goes in my mouth. And I'm very conscious about how it all makes me feel. We still eat some conventional beef around here. I'm not going to say that we're like 100% grass fed or anything like that. I do dramatically notice, like, the biggest difference I've noticed is going from like conventional beef to bison. Like there's a huge gap in the way that I feel if I'm eating a bison at Ted's Montana Grill, which I'm sure probably is corn fed, at least portion.
It will be.
At the tail end, right? But there's a definite difference in how that animal probably takes some of that in and turns that into protein and fat and flavor. But my gosh, like I just noticed, my wife and I noticed big time, like we feel lighter, we feel different. Our body feels like it's singing versus feeling heavy and like you need a nap.
Yep.
So
and there are different, the fat composition is different in grass-fed versus grain-fed. Right. Bison are just going to be leaner in general. But one of the things, and you can find all kinds of videos about me saying mean things about feedlots and about grain-fed beef, because there was 12 years where I made my living selling grass-fed beef. But I have refined my thinking about that. The difference between grain-fed and grass-fed beef is very slight compared to the difference between beef and anything else you can eat. Mm-hmm. Beef in and of itself is the most nutrient dense way to nourish human beings. It's what our bodies understand and know. And if you don't want it to have a lot of fat to it, you can buy leaner cuts of beef. You can buy beef that that there's a variety of different brands that have been around for a long time to do that. I have learned, my thinking has evolved, and you'll as we get to know each other and talk more, and we'll probably do another one of these because I have so much to say. But
Yeah.
I try to always say my current thinking is this, because one of the things I want to avoid, and there's so many people in the ag industry that they come out and say this is truth, and then they have to spend the rest of their career defending that statement that they know is wrong. It's extremely naive to think that any of us can say this is truth and it's never going to change. No, this is my current understanding of truth, and I reserve the right to learn more and to not be beholden to defend what I thought was true 10 or 15 years ago. And anybody that's still
Here,
defending that is,
yeah. I
go
was
ahead.
recently at a 2-day event called Belief Architecture, and so it's all about how do you architect your mindset, your belief system around what it is that you're building, and how you're, in this case it's a Christian event, so how you're co-creating with God and what that belief architecture looks like. One of the things that we just know biologically, and the speaker was talking about this, is that within every 6 to 7 years, really 5 to 7 years, you have a brand new body. Your
Right.
cells,
All the
every
cells
one of
have
your
died off
cells,
and they're new.
other than like your teeth, basically, I think is like they're the only ones that stay. And so everything is brand new. Your body is new. But I asked the person, I said, okay, but I know that like our thoughts stay with us, our brain cells stay with us, our right. And this is what's really important when you start to understand belief architecture, is like our thoughts are so powerful that even though you have a brand new body, all of your cells are renewed within every 7 years at the most. But you're like what you think about stays. And it's hard to get people to change the way that they think, because cognitive dissonance is real, and we only have enough time to maybe say that. But this,
Right.
I love the statement, my current thinking is this. Your other question before, by the way, what can I learn today, right, in that case, to solve the problem that you were solving at the time, to create an amazing eating experience. But anybody who's listening could intentionally implement this practice in their own life to say, hey, what can I learn today to solve this problem that I'm after?
Yep. And the corollary question to that is, am I actually solving the problem that's most important? So
Mm-hmm.
you'll note the question wasn't how do I sell more grass-fed beef? Because that wasn't actually the real question. The question was how do I sell beef that is so compelling, both intellectually and molecularly,
Yeah.
digestively, that it sells itself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, I want to take a few minutes. I love that question, by the way, because you're really that is the most important question. Like we can make more grass fed beef all day long, but if nobody likes it, then
Yeah,
we're just forcing
and
people to
that's exactly right. And
yeah,
grass-fed beef was just an example. We're not going to feed the world with grass-fed beef
right.
for a variety of different reasons. Those that want to raise it is great. Those that want to eat it, it's an available product. I created Thousand Hills in part because the market was asking for something that didn't exist, and I wanted to be a part of creating and serving that need. However, what I'm compelled about now, the question I'm asking now is how do we produce more beef of higher quality at a lower cost with a positive ecological footprint and eliminate all of the reasonable animal welfare problems. I mean, people look at feedlots, they watch Food Inc., and they have legitimate disgust, is maybe a good
Mm-hmm.
word. When we pursue industrialization of the food supply, and that is the only thing we're optimizing for, we shoot past optimum and balanced. And we can do better. We can feed cattle better than our current feedlot system. That is not a criticism or a critique of beef or grain fed beef, because we would solve nearly all of our civilizational problems, all of our health problems, all of our mental health problems. All of those things would be resolved if everyone ate more beef. And I am not interested in making beef more expensive and more exclusive and only available to the most affluent slice of our society. I'm interested in making beef cheaper, more widely available, and the only way to make it cheaper is to make it more efficient. And that is exactly what Progena Systems is all about.
I love it. That is so eloquently stated. And I couldn't agree more. The more beef, the better.
Right.
The more it just for all the reasons that you stated, for all the reasons that I know all of us know, So what you guys are doing at Pergena, I think is just really interesting. Give us a high level overview. They can go back and listen to Steve's interview too to get a deeper dive into how y'all are pulling this together. But you mentioned off the mic about just, the inefficient nature of
Yeah,
cattle
right.
consuming food, and how you're taking that and making it more efficient by salvaging the manure. So just maybe hit that for a couple minutes before we have to get off here,
Sure.
Todd.
Well, it starts with understanding human history. We only have a civilization because humans figured out how to create value from solar energy. Long before we had solar panels and batteries or Teslas, humans realized that nearly all the solar energy that falls on land is stored in the form of a plant leaf, either a tree leaf or a grass leaf. Those leaves are useless to humans because we can't eat them. We can eat them, but we get no nutrition out of it. People, pigs, and poultry don't have any way to use those things. And we learned how to domesticate sheep, goats, and cattle because they can eat those leaves and turn that into the most nutrient dense form of food possible, which is meat and milk. As a total aside, and I'm just going to put this out there and we'll have to go back again. I
Yeah.
believe that the fundamental thing that changed when Noah came off the ark was that all of the nutrients in the soil were washed into the sea. That's why seawater is so mineralized. And
Mm.
plants were no longer nutrient dense enough to support humans. So God told Noah, you got to start eating animals because animals concentrate the small amount of nutrients and make those dense enough that when we eat animal protein and fat, we get nourished. We won't even don't have time for that today, but
So good.
but
It's so good. And we're doing, you guys are doing some really amazing work to help
yeah,
preserve that system and be able to create a closed loop system where we're leaving the land better than we found it. We're leaving the food system more sustainable than we found it, and being able to pull more back out of it every year as opposed to take more out of it. And we're going to leave that as a cliffhanger because we're going to do this again, and we're going to dive back right back into it for
we're
you
gonna
guys
need
again.
part two to really dig into Progena. Yeah,
Yes,
sounds
sir.
great.
Todd, this has been amazing. Thank you for being on. I'm glad we got a chance to get to know you, and I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Sounds great.